What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. I am your host, Todd Rosales, and it is lovely to be back here today. We have an amazing guest for you folks, but before we get started, of course, if you want to check out anything C Lab's doing, if you want to go to any of our events in the Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Tampa, Orlando area, or any of the things that we do nationally, or even our virtual events, you can check us out at joinclab.com or Google Cannabis Lab Eventbrite to go to the events directly. If you are going, you're scrolling through your feed, you realize you don't have enough time to watch this interview, don't worry. You can always catch it on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/elevateyourgrind. And of course, the other 220 episodes we have there as well, too. My guest today is someone that I've wanted to speak to for a while. I've become friendly with him. He is a great person in the industry. I actually met him through another friend that used to work with him. He became a friend of Heisman. He became a friend of the management team. He became a friend of mine. He has an amazing brand, of course, an amazing team behind him, and he's somebody who I've gone to for advice more than once in this industry. So without any further ado, please welcome my guest today, the co-founder and CEO of Old Pal, Rusty Wilenkin. Rusty, thanks for joining me, man.
Man, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I'm stoked to chat.
It is absolutely great to have you here. You know, it's funny, when I first started going out to California, like 2018, 2019, maybe a little bit further, there were a few brands like starting to emerge as like recognizable to people that were outside of the industry. And I think we kind of get blinded being in the industry because you're a little bit more educated. Lowell being one of them, and then Old Pal was another one that quickly came in behind with this like just like nostalgic cannabis feel to it, where it's like, hey, I even hate like simplifying it this way, but it's just weed. Like, here it is, it's weed for you to bring and share with your friends. You know, tell me a little bit about the origins of Old Pal, and then I want to go back into your start in this industry, because I know that wasn't the first thing you've done.
Yeah, no, so Old Pal started about as organically as it possibly could have. You know, I uh I have a good friend, Jason Osni, my co-founder at Old Pal, who we basically met each other when I was working at Kiva distributing his brand that he'd started way back in the day called Native. He sold Native at the end of 2017, going into 2018, just the uncertainty in the adult use market, not having a huge balance sheet. They sort of wanted to take a win and move on to the next thing. And so early 2018, Jason approached me and was like, "Hey, I've been working with these amazing designers out of Austin. I have this really cool brand. I want to bring it to market. Um, but I really need some help on, like, call it the supply side and the distribution side." And so at that time, he had the rough idea of Old Pal, sort of the brand done, but there wasn't like a clear, it wasn't super clear where it was going to fit in. And we started having some conversations about the, like, call it premium value shelf or whatever you want to call that sort of space that, is great product for a great price, but, no one was really looking at in 2018. In 2018 out here, everyone was sort of looking at the proverbial dosists and candescents of the world, and like these businesses that were built for this cannabis 2.0 consumer that was ultra premium and kind of sterile. And we wanted to do something a little bit different. And we wanted to focus on the consumer that, no one else was really looking at. So we started branding that premium value shelf, making it look beautiful, really doing the things to make that consumer feel like they were part of something and feel valued. Um, and we started Old Pal in a different way than most folks. Most everyone that we knew starting brands in 2018, it was all about, I have this licensed facility that I bought for $20 million, or I have this massive grow. And, Jason and I, like, we basically bought $20,000 worth of packaging and then found some friends of ours who were willing to pack their flower into it and started building a business model around working with cultivators. From the get-go, we never had the resources to be vertical, nor did we want to be. Jason's really like a marketing visionary, and I'm more of a like operations sales person. Neither of us was a farmer by trade, nor did we have the experience to go build a farm remotely big enough to power the brand. So, Jason came to me in like early 2018. Probably first conversation was probably in like March. I think we incorporated Old Pal in like early April and launched on the Ease menu in May. Um, that first week we did like maybe like 100 grand or 200 grand in
Wow.
sales. And Jason and I looked at each other and we're like, holy shit, this is a very real business. Like we got to quit these other things we're working on and focus. And, we got a little WeWork and hired like two friends and started really pushing to try to be a company and, kept growing and growing from there.
That's awesome, man. I want to circle back to the business model because it is a very widely used business model today. And I think it's a great model. And I think Old Pal is a great brand to facilitate that. But I want to talk more about your start in the industry. Um, looking at your LinkedIn, it looks like most of your professional experience was in cannabis. There was a company just prior to that, but you know,
Yeah,
you and
a
I
lot of
have
weed
been
in my life.
we've both been through this. This is an industry where you have to love what you do because the money carrot keeps getting dangled and dangled and dangled, but the legislation isn't lining up to allow us to take advantage of it. What made you want to get into the weed industry? Is it just always been a passion of yours? Is it like, hey, I can make this my job? Like, what brought you to our lovely slice of the earth here?
It's interesting. Like I'd say though what brought me to cannabis in general was, my brother when I was younger was a drug addict, and you know, it forced me to take like at a very young age a view that all drugs are horrible and that, they're all the same and that everything we were told in health class was completely true.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think at like 14 or 15, somebody that was pretty close to me smoked weed with me for the first time. They're like, yeah, dude, like it's not what you think it is, like give it a try. And I remember just being like mind blown as to just like how different that experience was versus how I was told it would be.
Yeah.
And it really like made me question a lot and always just be interested in cannabis. From that moment forward, I sort of questioned the war on drugs and prohibition and just like what it had done to society in terms of getting black and brown people locked up so disproportionately and like, the call it like the obvious issues with the war on drugs and the criminalization of cannabis. And so that was like the original draw for me. I really enjoyed it. I smoked a lot of it. I probably started selling it when I was like 15, 16 in small amounts, just to like friends and things. Um, and that never really ended. Like I went to college and sort of kept doing that there. Um, when I moved to California at like 22 years old and I graduated Northeastern in Boston, my real goal was to work in finance, not in New York City. Being from New York, it was really scary to actually live in the city and have to do finance there. It's like a
Yeah.
whole other world to me. So I originally moved to California for a job in finance, and like when I had moved out of Boston, where I was selling a decent amount of cannabis at the time, like I was like, we're gonna shut everything down. Like I'm getting a real job. Like all the life, it's coming. I have to be a professional. And it's funny because I think within 6 months of moving to California, I was like hitting up like the cannabis people that existed on LinkedIn, which at the time were very different than who
Yeah.
exists now. Um, and one of the first people I found was this guy, Davis Lawyer, who had started a company, Aquarius Cannabis. And, that started as like a nights and weekends sales job I was doing while I was still doing my finance job. I grew their book of business, and like all of a sudden it was clear I could actually make real money working for them. Um, but I was selling prepackaged flower to dispensaries in 2014 for them, then bounced over to Kiva, Aquarius, sort of very early stage cannabis company in the very early days. There was even less capital than there is now, and had some hard times and didn't really work out. But at a career fair that I think Bloom Farms had put on back in like 2014 or 15, I'd
Wow.
met someone from Kiva, and they took me on. And I was one of the earlier sales reps there. Then I went over to Flowcana and helped them build out their distribution. And then went back to Kiva before starting Old Pal. So bopped around a bit, had a couple grows in the desert along the way. Um, and really like for me, I think I have an interesting
All right, folks, we're back. We had a little bit of our one of our beautiful summer Florida power outages a little bit sooner than we had thought, so we lost connection. But Rusty, we were talking about your history in getting into cannabis, and you had talked about getting in during the early days. I think it's really cool and responsible of you to figure out if you can do it on the side, but it's crazy. The crazy part to me and what I thought about when you were talking about it is when you said you moved out to California, the land of cannabis, that you said, hey, it's time to grow up. It's time to get a real job. It's time to put all this behind me. I was late to the game personally with cannabis consumption, regular cannabis consumption. I really didn't start till like 21, 22 when I had a real job. And I remember thinking to myself, because I really enjoyed it. I thought it benefited me significantly, that I was at the point where I'm like, man, I wish I had discovered this sooner, because at some point in the near future, I got to give this up. I have to be an adult. Like, life's going to start. I can't be a stoner. And then I went on a president's club trip. I worked for a tech company at the time, and one of the executives invited me back to his room because a bunch of them were smoking. And I thought it was going to be regular employees, and he was like the cool guy. It turns out it was the entire management team of this $110 million a year company, and they're all, smoking out of apples and tinfoil pipes and shit like this, like the dirty Jamaican weed that they give you at the all-inclusive resorts. And I'm like, wait a second, you guys all smoke weed? They're like, yeah. I'm like, oh, sweet. I don't have to give it up. So it's funny to me that I think at some point we all have that, at least the ones that grew up, like you said, where all drugs are bad. We have this thought where it's, I can't do this forever. And then you get into the industry and you truly have the hands-on experience and you're like, wait a second, this is good for me. This is better for me. And now one of the rare people who also figured out, not only is this good for me and do I enjoy it, but I can also make a career and a living off of this, which I think is incredible. So you start working in the industry. You're with Kiva. I know you had a little bit of time at Flowcana as well too. What point, and I know you said that your co-founder, you're distributing their product. It doesn't sound to me like entrepreneurship was part of your original plan, especially being in finance, because it's fund manager territory. And maybe it was, you can correct me.
Yeah,
But so
it's
was entrepreneurship the plan for you then?
yeah, it sort of always was for me. Like, originally I went to school for a degree in entrepreneurship and I worked for a billionaire and like an internship pretty early on in that experience. And the billionaire asked me towards the end of that internship, like, what are you going to school for? And I was like, entrepreneurship. He was like, dude, that is dumb. I would never hire someone with an entrepreneurship degree. Get a degree in something I can pay you to do, like accounting or finance. And ended up getting a job or getting a degree in finance as well. But I grew up in a family where my dad was an entrepreneur. I sort of like always thought working for yourself was like the pinnacle of like doing it. And I've had like a few other ventures along the way. Um, we started a pre-roll business back in like 2015 or 16 that was pretty small, but was like me and a good friend doing like CBD blend pre-rolls. Um, we sort of always had cultivations going that were in the desert and things while we were working for Kiva and those types of stuff. Um, the vision was always to be an entrepreneur. I'll say getting into cannabis in like 2014 or whatever that was, like it was a bit spooky to be an entrepreneur at that time. Like it felt a lot safer to me in that moment to be an employee, to be able to say, hey, I have a medical card, I'm doing things the right way. I didn't start this, I'm just working for this thing. And so like it was quite a while before I had the comfort with the industry and like the risk tolerance to even start like the pre-roll business or then our little cultivation we had in the desert. Because for me, like I just, you know, I understand this industry is federally illegal. I understand blah, blah, blah. But like it was a different time in like 2014, 15, 16. It seemed like, you could get unlucky and get in a lot of trouble. And so for myself, I was really working in the industry, wanting to learn as much as I can so that one day when I felt sort of the confidence in the legal framework to do it, I could go start something. Um, I feel really fortunate I started something when we did, because I think today it just takes a ton of resources to even look at starting something in the space.
Yeah, it certainly does. And I think we've both seen that from experience. How were those? So, and I believe you because I know, and I've interviewed a couple people from the early days of legal cannabis in California that were raided and arrested, even though they were doing everything by the book. Luke Scarmazzo, and I butchered his name in front of him too. So Luke, I'm sorry, but one of the first dispensaries in California literally just got out of prison. Sparky Rose, who was very instrumental in the beginning of, I want to say Papa and Barkley, but I could be wrong. He served time as well too, doing everything by the book, and was hesitant to get back in. So I see where, I'm sure there were plenty of people that you knew that were doing things the right way or may not have benefited from it or been punished for it. So I can see that being a hesitancy. You know, with that being said, and I agree with you, I think entrepreneurship is the ultimate goal. It's part of the reason why I do this. It's the one thing I get to control, and it's mine. I don't have to listen to anybody else with. But you have a pretty, for this industry, call stable, good job with a pretty substantial company in cannabis in California. What was your inspiration when your partner came to you where you're like, okay, was it the first weekend of sales? Like what gave you the confidence to say, Old Pal is it's the future? Or was it just the fact that it's like, hey, I get to do the same blocking and tackling that I'm doing now, except for the fact that I get to do it for me with a partner instead of doing it for a larger organization? Like what gave you that confidence, or at least the willingness to risk doing it on your own without any kind of parachute?
I think there were a few things like, first the guy who hired me at Kiva was the same guy who hired me back at Kiva the second time and was someone I really enjoyed working for. And like the main reason I came back to Kiva the second time was I was like, oh, I want to get to work for this guy for more time. And then he abruptly left like 3 weeks after hiring me.
Got it.
So, objective one of like working with the guy with a lot of beer experience that was super interesting was sort of like, oh, well, that's out. And, when Jason came to me with the idea for Old Pal, like the brand looked awesome. The people behind it were super legit. Um, Ease had basically agreed to carry it. And I had recently helped raise money for a BHO facility in Humboldt, where the guy that had funded that facility had expressed a willingness to invest more into like sort of projects I was working on or affiliated with in the industry. And so, with entrepreneurship having always been the goal, and like me sort of always wanting to do things for myself, like the idea that there was capital there day one, there was a big customer there basically day one, and that there was a partner who I had a lot of respect for there day one to work with us on it, it made it really easy to say yes. Like it wasn't, you read all these inspirational stories about entrepreneurs that quit their job and didn't get a salary for 2 years and sort of like had to slave away to make something work. Old Pal's been a ton of work. It's not been, just a walk in the park. But the flip side is like we stepped into like instant growth, and that makes all the other pieces a lot easier. We were able to pay ourselves a living wage day one. We were able to sort of like we weren't getting rich, but it was an ability to keep the lights on so you can actually focus on building something. And so it was an entrepreneurial like journey nonetheless, but it definitely wasn't we got from zero to the starting point a lot quicker than most people. And a lot of that was due to timing. That moment in time when we launched in California was like nothing I've ever really seen since.
Yeah. And I'll give you credit because you guys went with a true branding approach. I think, and I spent a little bit of time at Springbank, so I got very familiar with a lot of the marketing plans for a lot of different brands. And I will tell you, the majority of cannabis brands were way too reliant on the fact that they were bragging that they had the best weed or really good weed, or they had been cultivating weed forever. It was never a lifestyle type campaign where it's who's smoking it, who are they smoking it with, what activities are they doing, are they skateboarding, are they surfing, are they listening to music, are they going for a hike? And like, when you look at Old Pal, that was all of it. That was what you guys came to market with. It's, hey, we're the weed that you bring to go hang out with your friends. We're the weed that you share with your friends. We're the weed that will bring back the memories of when you used to smoke weed before you were buying in dispensaries. And that was an approach that is straightforward and as simple as that may seem now that we're talking about it today. A lot of companies, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, we're not taking that true branded lifestyle approach.
Yeah, no, I mean, like when we launched Old Pal, it just wasn't. Yeah, you hit it on the head with everyone was bragging. They had the best weed, most innovative, this, that, or the other thing, the craziest genetics, and like I think there's value in that. Like I don't mean to diminish what
No.
craft cultivators do. Like it's just, you know, that's one segment of the market, and there's other segments, and it's not like we were the first people that thought about selling affordable cannabis, but at the time, anyone else selling affordable cannabis was sort of looking at it like a trash can for their premium brand. It was purely an outlet for them to push through the product that didn't hit the quality specs for their existing brand. And as a result, the product in the bag was inconsistent. The bag looked like shit. There was no marketing support. And if a consumer complained, the reaction from the company was typically, you paid $20 for that. What did you expect?
Yeah.
That's, like just all across the board of piss poor like user experience. Like say what you will about some of the more like Coors Lighty beers of the world, but they care that their customers have amazing experiences every
Yeah.
time. That might be everyday man's beer or working man's beer, whatever you want to call that sort of mass category. But they spill more Coors than they sell craft beer in a week. Like it's just it's not even close. And I think cannabis is largely the same way where do many consumers wish that they could walk in the dispensary and buy a $70 after tax eighth every single time they walk through the door? Totally. The same way, like I like to drink tequila, and if I can drink 1942, I'd like to, but I'm not always in the mood to buy a $160 bottle. Sometimes I go buy, Casamigos or, Cuervo, like, there's different use occasions for different price points and levels of premiumness, if you will. And, I think in cannabis, we really were the first to look at our shelf and try to provide a beautiful branded experience with, the service those customers deserve like anyone else.
Yeah, and I'll give you credit, and if other people did it, it is what it is. But you really kind of helped pioneer the asset light business model with the brand, where there was a disconnect to me in cannabis, and there still is kind of a disconnect where there are phenomenal cultivators, craft cultivators, and just even people who can grow it at scale, different types of weed that are just that. They're great farmers, they're great cultivators. They're not branding experts, they're not sales experts. Fuck, they may not even be business experts, right? And instead of, doing some kind of equity split or doing a brand directly with them, the ability to not work with just one, but with multiple different cultivation facilities under your banner, I think that was extremely innovative at the time because everybody was very much, to me, and I could be wrong, this industry has a very big problem with this. There's a very big scarcity mindset in this industry and not a plentiful mindset where I do believe there is market share for everybody. The user base for cannabis is growing. And maybe it's not growing as fast as we want it to, but it's definitely not scarcity because at first I think we all need to come together and sell cannabis. And then once people are selling cannabis, now we can fight for the consumer for our different brands. But you're a consumer, I'm a consumer. I have brands I like. There is not a singular brand that I go into the store and it's every time I'm buying that brand. I might buy one brand more so than others, but I'm very much I like to explore, try new things and go out there. And I don't think I'm in the minority. I think I'm in the majority. You have a couple of your go-tos, but you're trying other stuff. You're trying new strains, trying this company, trying that company. So
100%. And I think part of that is also how the retailers are training their consumers today to a degree. Like, you know, eh, when you walk into a liquor store or a grocery store, there's just certain things you expect to see. Um, if you go into 150 California retail stores, just walk through, 150 of them, there's like three brands at most that'll be in all 150.
yeah,
It's still a, you know, it's wild that someone as knowledgeable in the space as you or myself can walk in a dispensary and like every single time I walk in a dispensary, I have a what's that moment. And I
Yeah.
end up pointing at something on the shelf and I'm like, I've never seen that before. What is that? Can you tell me about it? And that's just somebody that works in the space and looks at the space all day, every day. If you're a consumer walking into a dispensary today, like I would imagine 50+% of the stuff on the shelf is something where it's relatively new to you. You're curious about, you don't know what it is. And like, uh, people love to discover new things. It's like, it's not shocking that that's the experience. And I'd say more so within like flower than any other category, we see that. Um, I do think like I have an amazing experience with an edible brand. Like I really like wild gummies. Like I buy those every time.
Yeah.
Um, Edibles for me are less of a like smoking for me is a fun experience I do with other people. I bring people together. I love experiencing new strains. I love trying other brands' products. I love seeing all that there is to offer. Ours are obviously the best, but um, I think in some of the other categories, even in like pre-rolls or like R infused blunts as an example, like I think that's a product where if you're a consumer that loves it, you come in and you look for it and you buy that every time. If you're a consumer that loves flower, it's just too hard not to browse all the different strain offerings and brand offerings and like explore new things.
I agree with you very much. And it's funny that you bring up your blunts. At some point during the conversation, I wanted to bring this up because that is absolutely one of my favorite products that you guys have. Because I come from the world prior to smoking weed. I still love smoking a cigar. So to me, you might feel the same way. Like the process of smoking is there's two types of smoking to me. There's utilitarian smoking where I'm on the road doing something, I want to smoke a joint, and I smoke it like a cigarette. Like a dock worker would go out to the back and you would power, it's call it the conference joint, right? Where you're bumping outside with somebody, going, smoking a joint real quick, and then going back and doing what you have to do. And then there's the end of the night where I'm sitting on my patio, my feet are kicked up on the coffee table, I'm watching TV. And I love a blunt or something that's like a Canagar for that particular scenario because I want to enjoy the process of smoking. Now, the problem with that is most of these 2 gram, 1 gram hemp wrap, whatever they are, their price points start at 60, $80. You were able to take that experience and bring it down to a much more affordable price point. Because I can tell you, I remember going to, and I can call people out because it's my show. I remember, and it's not bad. I remember going to Planet 13 after an MJ Biz and wanting to buy multiple Packwoods. And the price point is like $80 for a lot of them, and thinking
Yeah.
you just spent $400 on 4 smoke sessions, which is absolutely ridiculous when you add in tax. Whereas I can do that for, 100, $150 with Old Pal and get multiple of them and bring them wherever I want to go and have that experience. So not only have you guys taken the regular flower and offer the shareables and the palitos and everything else, but you've taken things such as these blunts and made them affordable and consistent for people like myself.
No, I appreciate that. And like, admittedly, it was something that, like, in the early days of Old Pal, when we were raising capital and talking to investors, we often had to do the math for them because, when you think about the people that fund an industry versus the consumers, like, there is a different demographic or a different, like, economic level, if you will. And, you know, it was hard to explain to, Joe rich guy that's investing into cannabis, hey, like the consumer needs something more affordable than a $60 eighth. And you do the math for them and you're like, hey, like a heavy consumer can smoke, call it 1 to 3 eighths a week. An eighth with tax, this is 2018, is $65. That's $150 a week. 50 weeks, you're at like $7,500 a year. You're like, that's literally like the vacation if somebody doesn't get to go on, like the orthodontics that they don't get for their kid. Like you start to look at how much money that is, and it's like, you know, there needs to be options for everyone, and there needs to be options for use occasions that make sense. Like a packwood for you might make sense to celebrate something where you're having 10 people over and you want to show off that, you graduated your MBA program or whatever. But, if you're smoking like you would smoke a cigar in your backyard watching a game or something, you might not want to spend $100 for that experience. You might want to
Yeah.
spend 20. And I think, just matching budgets to use occasion makes a lot of sense. And, we've really tried to keep the consumer in mind because as much as we'd love to be consistent across the country and price point, like what's affordable in California, what's affordable in Florida, and what's affordable in Ohio are three different things, both from the consumer standpoint and from like what the market will bear standpoint. And so, you know, we're not always the most affordable option in a market, but we always make sure that our product provides a ton of value to the consumer.
So you had mentioned it earlier, but you had mentioned the Coors Light brands of the world, which is one of my go-to beers. I actually am a fan of Coors Original, which they don't have too much of on the East Coast.
Banquets over there.
Yeah, we don't get the we Publix used to carry the banquets. They used to have like one little stack of them, but they're getting harder and harder to find. But the one thing that you can say about Coors and the other light beers of the world of that category is they're consistent and you know what you get. Like you can think about the same thing with hotels. Like, are there nice? You have a regular Hilton or Marriott, or even their value brands of I don't know Marriott's. I know like a Hilton Garden Inn or like a Marriott. I don't think extended stay. That's a little one, but you know what I mean. Is
Whatever it is, yeah.
with those two flags, you know what you're getting, right? And that's why you stay there, especially if you're going to a place you've never been before. If you're staying at a Marriott Flags hotel, you know what to expect, you know what you're getting. You could probably even call out the type of continental breakfast that might be there. And that's what I see with Old Pal. And the one nice thing about that is your model, the way that you guys operate in California really supports that, because the one thing that a lot of people don't account for, bad harvests or product not
Yep.
hitting testing, right? Whereas if you have a single cultivator, whether that cultivator is cultivating specifically for you or for multiple brands, if something happens there where the quality is not where it needs to be, you're still stuck with that product that you're putting out. And then that affects your brand overall because you're not delivering on that consistency that you're known for. With your model, it allows you to pivot and say, hey, we can't take it from you this time because it's not where it needs to be, but you're still there. We're just going to put this in the bag this time, and then we'll come back to you when things are better. So, do you see that as being an advantage, especially in California, to be able to kind of pivot and make sure that whatever goes in an Old Pal bag is what the end user expects?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge advantage to the business model in general. Like if you're a cultivator, you're bound to what you grow.
Yeah.
If you're just a brand, you can maintain a really high consistency standard. Um, there's also drawbacks in that, when you don't control the farm, you don't control the farm. We have some genetics we love that no one wants to grow. Um, you know, certain thoughts on nutrients and cultivation practices. And like, you need to understand that, hey, we said this is your job and this is our job, so we'll do our job and you do your job. Um, but for some people, they want to be able to control every single aspect of how the sausage is made, and I understand that approach too. I just think, for us, we've been able to really up our quality over the past 5 years, not being vertical,
Right.
not through building new facilities and hiring new growers, but through working with the right people, building out a QA QC program that's really, I would say, industry leading and sort of, doing that work.
So I know, unfortunately, I lost a little bit of time with my beautiful power outage and it's still storming behind me. But one of the things, so now you guys are available, what, 8 or 9 states, and you can give me the actual number. We've been focusing very much in California because obviously that's where the best weed in the country is. And that's on being selfish about that. But with that being said, was the goal for Old Pal to have a national presence, especially the business model
Yeah.
that you had, or was the focus on California?
The focus was always on having a national brand. You know, it might not have been obvious from the outside looking in, but like sitting where we were sitting in 2018, it wasn't clear how overvalued they were, but like cultivation assets were just way too easy to fundraise for, and in our opinion, didn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you go look at a P&L for cultivation in California in 2018 today, like you would laugh at the decks people were putting out. It basically said that a 20,000 square foot indoor cultivation was a money machine.
I was in
you
venture
know,
capital at the time with a guy who was going to start a fund for cannabis. So I've seen a lot of those decks.
and so, you know, we sort of had this theory that California was going to be wildly competitive and oversupplied. Not so much as a if, but a when. Um, because the amount of capital pouring into infrastructure here was just massive. And like when you do the math on, hey, an acre of weed grows like 2 or 3 thousand pounds of dried flower. California sells like, I think 50,000 pounds a month, 40,000 pounds a month, something like that. Like, you know, it's a couple hundred acres could service the whole state, and we have thousands of them. Um, it quickly became just like clear that while we wanted to have a brand here, we wanted to be rooted here, we wanted to be here, we definitely wanted to be a national brand. And part of that is just like we were only a brand. We're not trying to be a cultivator, we're not trying to be a distributor. For us, you know, as brands grow, they become more real, for lack of a better way to put it. The more touch points you have with the consumer, the more times they see your logo, the more real that brand becomes. And so we wanted to be national. We wanted everyone to know us across the country. We wanted to be international. We still do, trying to figure out how to get into Canada. But the focus was really like putting our logo in front of as many people as possible in those days. It really wasn't sales or economically driven so much as like we believe brand is the thing that will matter most in cannabis over time. We still feel like we're in the first inning of cannabis, and it's a job of the brand to get that logo known and out
Sure.
there. And so, for us, it's always been a pretty linear focus of like how do we expand the brand? How do we expand the brand? How do we expand the brand? And working with great partners across the country is really the easiest way. It also, is the best diversification you can have in this business.
Sure.
Like, you know, I would say all of the different markets are in like the process of this, where like oversupplied, undersupplied, oversupplied, undersupplied. And when you're only in one market, as good as you can do, you're still at the mercy of the market to a degree. Whereas, you get to like 8 to 10 markets and you start having a little bit more diversified of a base where you have an ability to sort of weather the storm in one market to a degree that's way more difficult when you've only made one bet, if you will.
Yeah. And I completely agree with you. I think that branding is going to be the most important thing in the future of cannabis because the brand to me is like your friend that brings you to the dispensary and tells you what to buy, right? Like, don't get me wrong, I truly appreciate the cultivators and what they put out there, but as we mentioned earlier, they're not always the best branders. They're the best at what they do. So the brand becomes the trusted name that, and I like the fact that folks like you and the Heisman team, they're very transparent about we work with other cultivators that we put it in our bag because it's you are trusting us to curate the experience for you. You know that we're going to put a certain level of quality in there, and that's what you're buying. It's not everything else that goes behind it. And I think the cultivators will ultimately benefit from that in the long run as well too. So you build a brand in California. At what point do you take that step back and say it's time to open another market? Like where do you and what is the approach at that point to take the brand outside of California? Were you familiar with the licensing models available, or was it just let's take a bunch of meetings and see what we can find and see what makes the most sense for us?
Well, we started with a licensing model. So even in California, that's how we were working. So it made expansion really easy. It was just doing more of what we were already doing. And I'd love to say we were super deliberate with how we did state expansion, but in the early days of our fundraising, I was mentioning to a lot of our investors I'd love to see the brand in Las Vegas. I thought, adult use cannabis in Las Vegas is an amazing place for a national brand to be built. People come there, they buy things, they bring some of it home with them. Like it just the product naturally gets exported across the country. Um, and so we really wanted to be there. And just through the good fortune of having the right strategic investors, we sort of had some of those conversations, and one of our investors connected us to a group in Nevada. they were building an amazing greenhouse, and we liked the people and did a deal. It wasn't all that deliberate in the grand scheme of things. Like, I came from lending, and in lending, like if you want to do one loan, you sort of have to do 100 to get the diversification. And I knew we wanted to license the brand. And so if you want to license the brand once, you probably want to license it 10 or 15 times. And so, from that moment on, we sort of just kept trying to market ourselves as the people to work with if you're licensing brands. And I think we've delivered a lot of value to our partners over the past few years and sort of, you know, proven it's worth working with us.
Sure. No, I mean, you laid the blueprint during my time at Eyes, man. You laid the blueprint for me. You know, if there was a if there was a partner that was already working with Old Pal, that was a check in the column for me, because I knew, the model would fit, the partners were good, and holy shit, man, if I every single partner that I met with would just speak the moon of you. So you did something right.
Oh, that's good to hear. We have a really strong team, and like specifically the folks that lead and manage our state expansion from ops to marketing to project management are just so dialed. Like, it's funny when you like look at what you do as a company and like what somebody looking at your company could value. And we love our brand, we love our logos. I'm convinced they're super valuable things. But when we talk to people about our business, so many people realize that like what we've built is really a platform that, can take brands across the country,
Sure.
can sort of operationalize SKUs across multiple markets. We're launching, I think, 4 markets in the next week and a half. Like
Wow.
Missouri, New Mexico, Illinois will all hit shelves in the next like couple days. And being able to launch 3 markets in tandem, have marketing assets ready, having compliant packaging ready, all those pieces, it's a lot of work. And I think it's really like where our team stands out and is really special.
I agree with you, because I know how hard that could be, even stupid things like the compliant packaging, especially. I think you guys are in Pennsylvania too, and how ridiculous some of those requirements are. And it's like everything that you do is repeatable to a sense, where like 75% of it is repeatable, and then you have to do the little nuances to match that market, and it comes back 10 times until you get it approved. It is a little it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work and a lot of attention detail to operate. It's crazy because you have to operate different, but you have to make it seem like you're operating the same as close as you can across almost every market.
Yeah, it's I joke with people, but like when we talk about operating Old Pal in like 7 states or 10 states at the end of next week, whatever, um, it's really like running a business in 10 different countries that all speak English.
Yeah.
Um, the rules are different, the who's who is different, sort of everything about what you do there is completely different. Whereas like, I feel like if we sold like sunflower seeds or something, we would just send a UPS box to Nebraska. Instead, today we need to learn that Pennsylvania doesn't like it when you sell weed in bags, or Ohio doesn't allow you to actually market cannabis for smoking. Like the little nuances from market to market are mind blowing.
You're not allowed to sell cannabis in Pennsylvania. You're selling medical marijuana. Remember
Oh yeah, sorry.
that. Listen, man, let me ask you the stupid, question. When you started this back in 2018, did you ever think that today, and in the past couple of years, that you'd be invited on some of the biggest stages in the industry to share your story? Not this show. This show, there's like my parents and a couple of their friends are watching, but like the Benzinga conference, MJ Biz. Like, did you ever think that you would be the guy that they tap to share your story and share your expertise across the industry?
No, I mean, it's interesting. Like I definitely didn't have the vision for where this going was going. I think Jason, my partner, probably did. He's a little bit of a bigger thinker than me. But like no, I actually like I spoke at MIT in like 2017 about cannabis, and it was in a room, like a really impressive room of people, like all grad students at MIT and like alumni, whatever. And I was on a panel with like 3 other people who all like were more academically working in the space, you might say. Like we're researching the space, had theories. One of them had like a hardware play. And it was a moment where I realized that like the actual knowledge of how this business works is really interesting to people. Um, just in that, like after that panel, all the questions were sort of directed to me, not because I was by any means like smarter than anyone there. Everyone on that panel was way smarter than me, but their experience just like was in the idea of cannabis, and mine was in actually doing. And I think, that experience is still really interesting to people, and people are really curious how the thing works. In our small circle of people, it's really obvious how everything happens, but to just the average smart person who's interested in business, what we're all doing is just so interesting and mind blowing. So no, I didn't think I'd be on like the big stages, but I definitely realized that the knowledge would be interesting to people.
It is crazy to me, and I can tell you just from recent experience, I've been speaking to a lot of people in the industry from bigger ancillary companies and everything else. And I will tell you that the thing that blows my mind the most is if you work for a plant touching brand, you are exponentially more educated on the industry than everybody else. And I didn't think so, because I don't know if it's the imposter syndrome or anything else, but when you're in it and there's so much that you don't know and you're learning it and you're meeting people, I never realized if you get one step removed from that, the amount of information that you don't have access to is incredible. And, I
Yeah.
feel privileged to be in a circle with you and the people that I am, because you get to see the inside of the industry, and you get to understand how it operates. But I completely understand why all the questions would be directed at you, because you have that firsthand experience doing it. It definitely makes sense. So on that note, I know I've taken you right up to 5, but where do you see the future of the industry going? Where do you see the future of Old Pal? What's next here? Because it is, the industry is hurting right now. We're at a point in time where we're going to see a possible consolidation. Some people may not exist anymore, and I know it's kind of gone through that already. But there's a storm to weather here, and I think it's going to be. I hope it's going to be nice on the other side. But I'd love to hear where you think the future of the industry is going, and then anything forward thinking you could share about Old Pal.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think in terms of the future of the industry, like there's a lot of people with really myopic views right now that this whole thing doesn't work and it's crumbling and everyone should just go back to trapping and like stop really, worrying about this licensed market. And I just think it's like a huge miss, like similar to 2018 when any warehouse could raise $10 million. I think there's a ton of opportunity in capital markets that are just being overlooked because everyone's saying, no, it's not the time to invest. Um, and I think that'll change. I'm like hearing of interesting deals being done. Um, and I think when I look at like the overall industry, like I think there's a ton more states still to come online. I think there's sort of regions that are coming online now that are really interesting, like some of the southeastern licenses. There's a number of positive markets to come on, and then in the more mature markets, like, all of a sudden seeing prices on bulk materials go back up in California, prices going up in Michigan, like it's starting to feel like markets are fighting to find equilibrium where, some consolidation happens, some people leave the market, but what's left is a marketplace where people can sort of run responsible businesses, run profitable businesses, and sort of sustain. And I think over time, like we see normalization, we see way more retail, like, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years, like I think eventually cannabis is sold somewhere besides a dispensary.
Yeah.
Like if I owned a liquor store or tobacco shop that never applied for a dispensary license, come federal legalization, I would be pretty adamant that I deserve one. Um, you know, eh, I think I just still think we're in the first inning of this industry. I think,
I,
the like that longer term view is like very positive for me. I think the consumers are like the consumer today that buys weed for the first time is likely buying a branded product, which is really different than like ever in history. Like
yeah.
most coming of age kids that bought weed for the first time didn't, or like not kids, it sounds terrible. First coming of age moment for people when they bought cannabis for the first time, like it's it's for us, it was a Ziploc bag from some guy. Today, maybe it's a pre-roll that they bought from someone or that they took from mom and dad, whatever. But like the consumers that are entering the cannabis ecosystem are entering the legal cannabis ecosystem. They want to buy legal cannabis. There's a reason that all the illegal cannabis in New York still has a California logo on it
Yeah.
because like people want to feel like they're buying the legit, safe product. And so, I get really excited. I think like normalization, cannabis at events, like cannabis consumption lounges, like still economically, I don't fully understand, but when I go to them,
Same.
I love them. So like I'm hoping someone figures out how to like make a quasi legal after club. I think it's fucking awesome. Um, but yeah, I like overall, like I still think we're in the early days. I think this industry grows, and I think for a lot of the people working in it that are becoming discouraged, it's a big mistake because whether this is a $1 trillion industry or a $1 billion industry or whatever it is, like the one thing to me that's super clear is like it's not going anywhere. Like
No.
this business is here to stay. And, you know, there's going to need to be people to power these businesses. And, you know, the longer you work in this industry, the more you establish yourself as a good actor, as a good operator, and not being, you know, the stereotype of someone in cannabis, the longer and more valuable I think all of us become. So, I hope I'm working on Old Pal forever. I hope we're building it into the biggest brand in the country. But even in a world where, Old Pal's consolidated in something or where, someone else sits in the seat of CEO, like I think the experience in this industry is super valuable. And like there will always be sort of roles for good people in this business because it was huge before it was legal. It's not going to get smaller.
I agree with you, man. I think we're hitting a rough patch. I mean, every industry hits it at some point. The dot-com bubble is infamous, and a lot of people lost a lot more money than they're losing in cannabis. So I'm glad that you said that. I hope that people are inspired by that because we do know a lot of good people that have been laid off and lost their jobs. But I will tell you that those companies that did layoffs, a lot of them are starting to turn around and fill spots again. So for those of you that are looking for work in the industry, just keep your head down, keep moving forward, and hopefully this little conversation with Rusty inspired you. Rusty, man, anything you want to plug or anything else before I let you go?
Um, no, I mean, we'll be on shelves here like by June in Illinois, New Mexico, and Missouri. So if you're out and about in those markets, make sure you check us out. And otherwise, keep it rocking. It's been awesome. Thanks, Todd.
Awesome, man. Well, I got to get my ass out to California so I can load up on a bunch of those old pal blunts. But other than that, man, it's always great catching up with you. I'm sure I'll see you at a show in the near future, and we'll have to do one of these in person whenever we can.
Awesome. Later, buddy.
Absolutely. Thank you to Rusty and thank you to everybody at home. This has been another episode of Elevate Your Grind. Of course, if you want to check out anything C-Lab related, it is at www.joinclab.com. If you missed any part of this interview or you want to watch any of our other interviews, you can watch that at youtube.com/elevate your grind. This is another episode of Elevate Your Grind. We'll see you next time.